If you look at yourself, the same analysis, what are your best traits and what are the worst traits of Dr. Jordan Peterson?
Well, I think that it's been difficult for me to optimally regulate my irritation at times over the last few years. And I'm trying to get that right, to figure out what the right, because a lot of things that have happened have outraged me. And then I'm not exactly sure what emotional tone to take as a consequence of that outrage. And that's a very complicated thing to figure out. And that's been exacerbated, that problem, by the fact that my family and I have been the targets of very conniving and attacks and underground attacks. And that isn't stopping. I mean,
another time when your wife was fighting a deadly cancer.
Yeah, and my daughter was sick, and so was I. So so it's very difficult to regulate your temper properly under those circumstances, let's say. And so I don't imagine.
Where have you most improved yourself, do you think, as you've got older?
I get better and better at listening, and I'm better and better at finding my way forward with the words that I choose. And it's just a continual, in some sense, incremental expansion. I've probably got better too at seeking out corrective information. So, for example, I got banned from Twitter recently for making a statement that I don't regret, by the way. But I had two friends of mine, grill me, and I put that on YouTube. It's called Mean Tweets. It was an hour and a half, I said, and both of them are very, very smart people. One of them's more liberal than I am, I would say, but a very good advocate for that liberal position. And I said, well, let's hash this out. There's some things I've said that have made people angry, and you think I made them unnecessarily angry, and that I was unnecessarily harsh in my tone.
Did they change your mind?
They changed my approach, because one of the things I decided was that I would try to be equally judicious in my words, but that I would use a calmer and more measured tone. And I don't mean use instrumentally. I mean that I would attempt to make the effort to take as much unnecessary emotion out of the statement as possible. And so I started to do that in some of my more recent videos. I mean, I tried to do that before. I think part of the reason that my interview with Kathy Newman went well was because I kept my head. Yeah. And I didn't get irritated. I had a
I mean, she's a good friend of mine, and I watched it with great interest because I felt like you were slightly on parallel lines. And that maybe she would do that interview differently if she had her time again, actually.
I think that's highly possible. Yeah. So yes, I changed my approach quite dramatically. And what happened was that I read a Telegraph article I recently published about Deloitte, and it was a very cutting article. And I was really worried about publishing it because I think it was the most cutting article I've ever written. And I read it on YouTube very, very calmly and carefully. And what happened was the response was much more positive and much less negative. So there was no downside to it. So people didn't say, some people said, I think that I liked your tone when you were more aggressive, especially on issues like this. But by and large, it worked even better because I could be careful in what I was discriminating. And then to ally that with calmness actually made it more potent rather than less. And so that was very interesting. And I mean, we had a very serious discussion about this, my friends and I. I had a lot of people with me in Miami when this was happening, across the political spectrum. We had a very healthy debate for a couple of hours about whether or not I had gone beyond some reasonable limit in the way I was conducting myself, say, on YouTube and Twitter. And some people were very strongly advocating for more of what I was doing and even harsher. And others were saying, well, you're alienating people that you could otherwise communicate with unnecessarily.
See, it's interesting about the listening. Like two of my sons have come today because they just wanted to listen to this. Very unusual. One of them's not even been to the studio before. So he just said to me, I said, give me some advice. You love Jordan Peterson. What's the advice for the interview? He said, just listen more than you normally do. So I've tried hard to ask a question and let you answer.
Right.
And so I'm work in progress. And I've been interviewing people for 35 years. But I do think the listening, as I've got older, I felt the same thing. That
it's a real skill, man.
Listening is a powerful tool, actually.
Oh, yeah. Well, there is nothing that people like more and need more than to be listened to. You know, and that's partly why the left clamors all the time. You know, it says, look, there's all these people who aren't being listened to. It's like, there are a lot of people who aren't being listened to. They're absolutely right. There's no doubt about that. And I've dealt with people who were extraordinarily marginalized, so to speak, in my clinical practice. And some of those people, to straighten out their minds, they need like 10,000 hours of listening. Because no one, and I mean this literally, I've had people in my clinical practice, no one ever listened to them their whole life.
Yeah.
And so when they start talking, they're all over the place, they're disorganized, they're hyper emotional, they're distrusting, and they have to have all that conversation that you would have needed to become properly integrated.